Let's talk about something weird that happens to all of us. Have you ever looked directly at something and just not seen it? It's this fascinating and, frankly, really frustrating thing our minds do. We're calling it the illusion of invisibility. And believe me, it happens way more than you think.
We've all been there, right? You're tearing the house apart looking for your keys or your phone or your glasses, only to find them sitting in the most obvious spot imaginable. And you could swear you looked there 10 times. So how is that possible? Is your brain playing tricks on you? Well, yeah, kind of. And look, this isn't just you being forgetful. It's a predictable quirk of how we perceive the world. In fact, the famous Gestalt psychologist Wolfgang Metziger pointed out that this tendency for things to just disappear from our view, even when they're lying right out in the open, is so reliable, you could literally make a party game out of it. So why does this happen? Why can our own keys openly hide from us? Well, the answer comes down to how our brain deals with the absolute chaos of the world around us. To survive, it doesn't just see everything. It builds mental maps. Now, the technical term for these maps is schemata. Just think of a schema as a framework, a web of associations that helps your brain organize and process information super efficiently. Without these, making even the simplest judgment would be incredibly hard. So, for example, when you think school, your brain doesn't just see a building, right? No, your schema for school instantly fires off all these related ideas: teachers, books, subjects, math, literature, and on and on. It's this web of connections that lets you navigate the idea of school without having to relearn it every single time. It's what makes our world feel stable and predictable. But here's the catch. While these mental maps are great for keeping things stable, they also make our brains really, really resistant to change. Our brains are creatures of habit. They love consistency, and they get super uncomfortable with any new fact that doesn't neatly fit the map they've already drawn. And get this, there's some amazing neuroscience that shows what's physically happening here. When a piece of information fits our existing map, our brain's reward center gives us a nice, pleasant little buzz. But when something comes along that challenges that map, whoa, the brain's threat center, the amygdala, lights up. Ambiguity isn't seen as a chance to learn. It's processed as a potential danger. So to avoid that feeling of being threatened, our brain has these clever defense mechanisms. It'll just dismiss the new information, pretend it doesn't exist, or, my personal favorite, it'll label it as some weird one-off outlier. Basically, it'll do anything to avoid the hard, uncomfortable work of having to redraw the entire mental map. And this isn't just about losing your keys. This exact same process scales way, way up, from our personal lives to the absolute highest levels of human knowledge. Entire fields like science and economics operate inside these frameworks, which can sometimes make inconvenient facts completely invisible. As the physicists Alan Lightman and Owen Gingerich pointed out, major scientific breakthroughs don't usually happen just because someone finds one new fact. Nope. They happen when someone creates a whole new framework, a new map that suddenly allows a pile of previously ignored, invisible facts to finally make sense. Before that new map exists, those weird facts are just ignored. And this kind of blindness can have massive real-world consequences. To really see how, we have to look at a pretty wild story from the world of finance. A story that involves a buried truth and a market about to fall off a cliff. Okay, so picture this. It's the early 1960s, and you've got this brilliant, kind of renegade mathematician named Benoit Mandelbrot. He was studying price changes in financial markets. Now, at the time, the dominant idea, the accepted framework, was that price changes followed a nice, neat, predictable bell curve. Well, Mandelbrot discovered that this was just dangerously, completely wrong. I mean, just look at this. The financial models everyone was using were clear. A huge, wild market swing should only happen about once every 7,000 years. But when Mandelbrot, and even the guy who created the theory, Eugene Fama, looked at the real-world data, these impossible events were happening every 3 or 4 years. The evidence was right there. So, what did the leading economists of the day do with this bombshell discovery that their entire framework was built on a flawed foundation? According to the historian Sebastian Mallaby, they buried it. They just chose to look the other way. And here's why. The new fact was just too threatening. As one economist at the time basically admitted, if Mandelbrot was right, it meant their statistical tools were obsolete. It meant decades of their work was essentially meaningless. It was just easier to ignore the fact than to tear down the entire intellectual house they had built.
The cost of this intellectual blindness became absolutely devastating on Black Monday, the stock market crash of 1987. According to their models, an event of that magnitude shouldn't have happened even if the market had been running for 20 billion years. That's older than the known universe. Their framework had made the very real risk of a crisis completely invisible.
Now, that's a pretty extreme example of a framework failing. But sometimes the framework isn't just an intellectual model. It can be political. This old anecdote from the economist Ha-Joon Chang just captures it perfectly. When the correct answer depends entirely on what the boss wants to hear, well, the facts can become whatever you want them to be. So we've seen how entire fields like economics can be blinded by their own frameworks. But this isn't just about scientists and markets. This exact same process of filtering and framing reality is happening inside your own brain every single second of every day.
This is such a profound idea, first put out there by the philosopher Immanuel Kant, and now backed up by modern psychology. We don't just passively receive an image of the world through our eyes, like a camera taking a picture. No, our perception is an active construction. As Daniel Gilbert puts it so beautifully, our perceptions are portraits, not photographs. They reveal the artist, you, just as much as the subject.
So, the crucial point is this. What you perceive is never just a pure reflection of the outside world. It's a psychological cocktail, a blend of raw sensory data mixed with your existing knowledge, your beliefs, your feelings, and even what you want to be true.
And all of this leads us to a pretty unsettling conclusion from the sociologist Charles Perrow. We always say seeing is believing, but a lot of the time, the exact reverse is true. In really complex situations, or when facing a fact that just shatters our framework, sometimes we have to believe it's possible before our brain will even allow us to see it.
Which leaves us with a final big question. If our reality is a portrait we're constantly painting ourselves, and if our frameworks can make certain truths completely invisible, what might we be collectively blind to right now simply because we don't yet have the framework to see it? Thanks for joining us for this explainer.